The snow fell in quiet, suffocating sheets that night, coating the streets in a silver hush. But not even the soft blanket of winter could muffle the sound of that tiny, desperate cry. I first noticed it in the corner of an abandoned alleyway, just beneath the skeletal remains of a cardboard box, soaked through with rain and tears, both mine and his. He was so small that he fit entirely into the curve of my hand, trembling with a cold that seemed to seep into his bones, a silent shivering that spoke louder than words ever could. His eyes, round and impossibly innocent, were fixed on me, as though asking a question I didn't yet have the courage to answer. Could I save him, or would I walk away like everyone else had? Around us, the world was oblivious. Traffic hums muffled by snow, lights glowing like distant stars, and the faint smell of smoke from chimneys curling into the night. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was that small, shivering life, and the impossible weight of the choice he had forced upon me. Rescue him, or let him vanish into silence. The snow fell in thick, muffled layers, covering the streets in a soft, ghostly hush. I was walking home, the bite of winter air cutting through my coat, my breath forming small clouds that dissolved into the night. The city was quiet in that rare, unsettling way that makes every sound feel magnified, as if the world is holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint trembling cry, so fragile I thought it might be the wind at first. But no, it was alive, desperate, searching. My steps faltered, my chest tightening as I followed the sound to its source. In the corner of a narrow alley, beneath a sodden cardboard box, I found him, a tiny puppy, fur-matted with dirt and rain, shivering in a way that made my own body ache. His eyes, round and wet, locked onto mine, filled with a mixture of fear and pleading that I couldn't ignore. I knelt in the snow, hesitant, unsure how to bridge the vast gulf of his suffering, and yet feeling an unspoken bond form in that instant. He was smaller than my hand, fragile as glass, yet somehow demanding every ounce of my attention. The sound of his trembling body against the wet ground, the soft whine of his whimpering, struck a chord in me I hadn't realized existed, a raw, aching responsibility, a pull I couldn't resist. I felt the enormity of the choice pressing down, heavier than the snow piling around us. Leave him to the indifferent night, or take him with me and risk failing him. I could feel the cold seeping into his bones, his tiny heart racing against the inevitability of numbness, and in that moment, it seemed that the only life that mattered was his. I wrapped my scarf around him, careful not to crush him, careful not to startle him with sudden movement. He pressed his trembling body against mine, and I felt something in him begin to settle, a whisper of trust forming where terror had lived. The alley around us was empty, the city oblivious, and yet in that frozen, forgotten space, time slowed. I noticed the faint glow of distant streetlights reflecting off the snow, the scent of damp brick and melting ice, the faint whistle of wind curling through the corners of the buildings. Everything else faded into insignificance. The small life in my hands carried the weight of stories I could not yet know. Nights spent cold and alone, hunger gnawing at his small frame, fear that had hardened into instinct. And yet, there was hope there too, delicate and tentative, like a fragile flame struggling against the wind. I whispered to him softly, words barely audible over the rustle of snow and distant traffic, promising safety, warmth, a place to belong. His ears twitched, his little tail curled around my wrist, and for the first time since I saw him, his trembling slowed. I knew the night was far from over, that the cold still had power to steal him from me. But in that instant, our connection was enough. I knelt beside him, watching, hand resting lightly on his back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his chest. Every so often, he twitched in his sleep, a reminder of how deeply ingrained his fear still was. But slowly, gradually, he relaxed. It felt like a silent negotiation, a pact formed without words. I would be here, unwavering, and he would allow himself to trust inch by inch. Outside, the city remained oblivious. Snow drifting past windows and sliding down streets, lights reflecting on icy puddles, life moving on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, the small apartment became a sanctuary, a cocoon of warmth and presence where two lives, both shaken and tentative, began to intertwine. I realized that caring for him wasn't just about tending to physical needs. It was about being present in every shiver, every hesitation, every cautious glance. The enormity of the responsibility pressed on me, yes, but it was tempered by a fragile joy, the kind that comes when a being who has known only fear begins to let go, even just a little. By dawn, he had nestled against me fully, tiny body warm and still, breathing slowing, a soft, contented hum vibrating through him. I felt an ache of relief so deep it was almost painful, and a quiet pride that we had reached this point together. Hands that held, hearts that waited, eyes that witnessed. This was the beginning, the first step of a journey I could never have anticipated, yet one I knew I was irrevocably bound to. And as sunlight seeped through frost-laced windows, dusting the room in pale gold, I understood. Rescue was never about grandeur or heroics. It was about presence, consistency, and the willingness to hold through every trembling moment until trust could grow. The first days passed in quiet observation, each moment revealing layers of fear and resilience etched into his tiny frame. I named him Noah, after the survival I glimpsed in his eyes and the way he had clung to life with impossible tenacity. He would explore the apartment hesitantly, sniffing corners and shadows as if mapping a territory that was new yet frighteningly intimate. Every time I tried to approach him, his ears twitched back, tail curling against his body, the ghost of past traumas flickering in every motion. It was as if he carried invisible stories, fragments of neglect and abandonment, woven into the way he reacted to sounds, to light, to touch. The world outside had taught him caution, but inside these walls, I became the constant he could measure himself against, the slow, steady rhythm that promised safety. Yet even in this safety, trust was fragile, and patience was a currency that had to be earned, one careful gesture at a time. I watched him flinch at shadows cast by the radiator's warm glow, jump at the soft creak of floorboards beneath my feet, and tense at the distant howl of a dog outside. Every twitch, every pause, every cautious sniff of air spoke volumes about nights spent cold, hungry, and alone. I imagined the alleyways, the concrete slick with rain, the stinging wind slicing through his fur, and I felt a weight settle in my chest. Grief for what he had endured, guilt for not finding him sooner, awe for the resilience he carried. The apartment became a canvas where we repainted safety in slow strokes, extra blankets on the floor, a gentle hand reaching without sudden movement, the soft hum of a voice that repeated, "It's okay, it's safe, you're here now." Little by little, his body began to relax. Evenings brought introspection. I found myself lingering beside him as he rested, tracing patterns in the soft fur of his back, noticing the way his eyes followed me, hesitant but curious. Each glance carried memory and fear, yet also the flicker of recognition that I was not going to abandon him. I began to reflect on what abandonment meant. Not just the absence of care, but the erosion of trust, the quiet lesson that the world could not be relied upon. I saw those lessons in him, etched in furrowed brows and tense shoulders, and I realized that healing would not come quickly. But the apartment, once merely walls and furniture, had become a sanctuary. The sunlight slipping through frost-laced windows, the faint scent of pine and dust, the soft whisper of heat from the radiator, all these ordinary things became extraordinary because they represented constancy, presence, and safety. I wanted him to feel free, to reclaim instincts buried under layers of caution. I let him explore the edge of the room, placing toys near him, soft objects that could be batted and nudged without threat. I watched his first tentative interactions, the small leaps of curiosity into safe spaces, the cautious sniffing of blankets, the tentative pawing at my hand. Every tiny movement became a victory, every soft whimper replaced by a quiet sigh. We communicated through presence rather than words. My patience, his observation, a rhythm of trust built one moment at a time. The apartment became a map of recovery, with every corner, shadow, and object a checkpoint in the slow journey from fear to tentative security. At night, he would curl beside me, tiny nose pressed against my hand, eyelids flickering as he drifted in and out of sleep. I could feel the tension gradually leaving his small body, replaced by a fragile relaxation, like frost melting into sunlight. Yet the shadows of his past never disappeared entirely. They lurked in sudden flinches, hesitant pauses, and the tremble in his tail. And in those moments, I understood that true rescue is not simply removing someone from danger. It is witnessing, bearing, and slowly dissolving the invisible scars left by fear and neglect. I whispered stories into the dim light, soft voices carrying through the apartment, telling him he was not alone, He was safe. He was seen. In the quiet hours, as the city slept beyond the frost-streaked windows, Noah began to show signs of trust that felt almost miraculous. Tentative tail wags, relaxed paws, even a small, cautious nuzzle against my hand. Every gesture was a bridge spanning the gulf between past trauma and present safety, a reminder that love is not always loud or immediate. It is quiet, consistent, patient, and unrelenting. And as I watched him finally rest without fear, I realized that the shadows of the past, though always present, could be softened by unwavering care. That night the apartment was no longer a room, it was a promise, and he, tiny as he was, had begun to believe it. Winter's grip tightened, the city outside a blur of white and gray, indifferent to the fragile life thriving within my small apartment. Noah had grown more confident, his tiny legs carrying him with newfound curiosity, but the shadows of vulnerability lingered. One morning, I noticed a subtle tremor in his paws, a reluctance to rise, a lethargy that had never been part of him before. Panic rose in my chest, a tidal wave of fear and guilt. I knelt beside him, hands trembling as I lifted him gently, feeling the heat, or lack thereof, radiating from his small body. His eyes looked up at me, round and trusting, and I felt the weight of every night he had survived alone pressing down on me. I whispered reassurances, trying to steady my own racing heart. He was more than a pet. He was a responsibility, a living testament to survival against impossible odds. And now, I had to be more than I had ever been before. The vet's office was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells, the beeping of machines echoing in my ears as I waited, pacing the small space, gripping his tiny body close. The doctor examined him with quiet efficiency, her voice clipped but gentle, delivering words I could barely process. Infection, dehydration, possible complications if left untreated. Fear pooled in my chest, but amidst the panic, there was resolve. I would not let him fail now, not after everything. I felt his paw press against mine, his small pulse trembling against my fingers, and I realized the enormity of care stretched far beyond warmth and food. It demanded vigilance, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. Back home, the apartment became a battleground of tenderness and urgency. I spent hours monitoring him, wrapping him in warm blankets, offering small sips of water, encouraging him with soft, persistent murmurs. He shivered despite the heat, paws twitching, tail curling, eyes flicking nervously toward every sound. Sleep became fragmented, a series of minutes stolen between watching him, whispering his name, and adjusting his blankets to shield him from drafts. Each night I felt the full weight of our bond, the enormity of trust he had placed in me, and the terrifying possibility of losing him. Every tremor, every hesitant breath, every tiny whimper was magnified into a deafening sound in the quiet apartment. But through the fear, something remarkable began to unfold. Noah responded to the constancy of care, the quiet patience that refused to let him falter. I watched him slowly raise his head when I approached, feel him tentatively paw at my hand, and finally, after long, anxious hours, see the first glimmer of energy return. Each small movement felt like a victory, each wag of his tail a triumph over the shadows that haunted him. I realized that resilience was not instantaneous. It was a process, painstaking and delicate, shaped by the unwavering presence of someone who refused to give up. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white serenity, a stark contrast to the turmoil we had endured. Inside, the apartment hummed with life reclaimed. I carried him to the window, letting him peer out at the falling snow, his small nose twitching at the unfamiliar sense of frost and pine. There was curiosity in his eyes, tentative and bright, as if he were learning the world anew. I sat beside him, hand on his back, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse, and I understood in that moment that true love is forged in fire. It is measured not by ease, but by the determination to remain present in the face of fear, to offer warmth when the world is cold, to hold steady when survival itself is uncertain. By dawn, his small body curled into a ball of cautious comfort, breathing slow and even. The ordeal had left scars, tiny tremors, and a wariness that would take time to fade. But in those quiet moments, I saw the spark of life that had always burned within him, now fanned into resilience by patient hands and unwavering heart. The nights of terror and sleepless vigilance had forged a bond deeper than fear, more enduring than any simple companionship. And in that bond, I discovered my own capacity for endurance, for tenderness, for courage in the face of vulnerability. We had passed through the fire together, and though the embers of past suffering lingered, there was warmth now, a light steady and unshakable, guiding us both toward trust, toward recovery, toward life. The snow outside had softened into a gentle drift, falling in quiet flakes that blanketed the city in pale, forgiving light. Inside, Noah curled comfortably in his small bed, the blankets wrapped around him like a cocoon, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For the first time, I felt the full weight of relief settle into my bones. Not the shaky relief of temporary safety, but the enduring kind that comes after nights of fear, of whispered promises and relentless vigilance. He had survived. We had survived. And in the quiet warmth of the apartment, the two of us were irrevocably changed. He looked up at me, eyes bright, no longer haunted but curious. His tail gave a slow, deliberate wag as I approached, nudging my hand with a tentative, affectionate push. I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't realized I had held back in weeks, letting it echo gently across the wall. It was a laugh that carried gratitude, release, and awe all at once. I reached down and stroked his fur, feeling the softness beneath the coarse, matted strands of his past, marveling at how resilient a fragile life could be. He pressed against my chest, nose tucked under my fingers, and I realized that every night of sleepless worry, every tremor of fear he had endured, had led us to this simple, perfect moment of shared peace. The world outside continued on, indifferent to our story, but inside time slowed. I watched him explore, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, sniffing the corners of the room, circling his blankets, even venturing to the sunlit window ledge. Each small victory was a celebration, a testament to trust reclaimed, to a bond forged in the crucible of shared survival. I followed him, hand hovering protectively, watching as he discovered the warmth of the sun on his fur, the slight sway of branches outside, the distant chirp of a bird. He moved through these ordinary wonders with a reverence I could hardly describe, as if every simple pleasure was a treasure reclaimed from a world that had once abandoned him. Christmas lights flickered faintly in the corner, casting muted colors across the room, and I thought back to that first night, the freezing alley, the frantic whimpers, the silent plea in his wide, trembling eyes. I remembered the fear pressing down like an iron weight, the quiet horror of knowing I might fail him, the tentative warmth that began when I wrapped him in my coat and carried him into my apartment. And now, as he rested quietly against my chest, I understood the full spectrum of what rescue could mean, not just saving a life from the cold, but healing the invisible fractures of trust, repairing the fragile architecture of hope, and creating a space where love and safety could coexist. I sat there, sunlight drifting across the frost-streaked windows, watching him settle finally, fully, into the rhythm of peace. I realized that he had taught me as much as I had taught him, that resilience is forged in patience, that love is measured in presence rather than grand gestures, that trust is the quietest, most profound victory one can achieve. Each exhale he released, each tiny sigh of contentment, carried the weight of a journey neither of us would forget, from alleyways and shivers, from fear and isolation, to warmth, care, and unwavering connection. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, unbroken, silent as a prayer. Inside, Noah curled in my lap, tail draped over my arm, eyes half closed, completely at peace. I stroked his fur, feeling the tiny tremors of life that had once been fear, now replaced by quiet assurance. And in that simple, intimate space, I understood the culmination of all the nights, the cries, the trembling pause, and the whispered promises. Rescue was not an act of heroism, but an act of devotion, of showing up, of refusing to let go. And now, as snowflakes drifted past the windows and light poured in, both of us silent still and entirely present, I knew that the heart could heal, trust could be rebuilt, and love, even when smallest and most fragile, could reshape a life completely. Noah let out a soft, contented sigh, and I pressed my forehead to his, eyes closing briefly in gratitude. The city continued on outside, the world moving indifferent as ever, but inside, a small life had been saved, trust had been restored, and hearts had opened, silent and unbroken, beneath the gentle snowfall. And in that quiet, I felt the true meaning of rescue, the enduring power of presence, and the unspoken promise that no one, no matter how small, need ever face the cold alone again.